following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
And I actually think it's something that I personally didn't even know this was happening. And so I would love more people to understand like how people can use the graph to do these type of things, right? Public goods, right?
We're like astronauts floating in the space of time, lost between the past and the future.
Welcome to the GRTIQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Chika Uwazie, co-founder of Afropolitan, a digital nation to enable all Africans to build abundant lives. As you will hear during this interview, Afropolitan is another great example of how Web3 is enabling innovation, and in this case, how people can build and form communities, including the prospect of new nations throughout the world. During this discussion, Chika and I talk about her career in recruiting and HR, including some great advice for anyone currently looking for work. We talk about the backstory behind Afropolitan, along with its mission and vision. We explore some very sensitive topics as well, such as race and gender equality. And we also talk about a very familiar theme on this podcast, how Web3 seems to be activating the entire continent of Africa. As always, we started a discussion by exploring Chika's background.
Yeah, so my education journey is interesting because I'm Nigerian American, and there's probably a data point that a lot of people don't know, but Nigerians are actually the most educated ethnicity in the US. So you can imagine the pressure is on to be the best, an A++ student. And so I went to Bethune-Cookman University for my first degree in psychology, but I had to fight it because my mom and dad were like, you're going to be a medical doctor. And that was the path we created for you. And I rebelled against them and said, well, I have a full scholarship, so I could do what I want. So I went on to get a degree in psychology. I fell in love with it. I think it started because I took an AP psychology course in high school, and I really loved the teacher. And I just loved everything about the human mind and how it works. Because I also had a chance to go to historically Black college university, I even got to learn not just psychology, but even the psychology of an African American. So it was really cool. And then after that, I had like two pathways. I could either go on to become a clinical psychologist. I really fell in love with industrial organizational psychology, which is the study of work in psychology. And I said, well, I don't want to get a PhD. And again, rebelling against my parents who expected it. So I want to go into HR. And so I started my HR career. And then I went on to Georgetown and got my master's there.
Well, Chika, being new to Web3 myself, I've had the opportunity to meet with people all across the world, especially in the Graph Advocates program. And I've been astonished at the skill and knowledge level of people living in Nigeria. It's been one of the things that I've learned in my own growth and journey into Web3. How do you explain what's going on in Nigeria? It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of hard to describe because it's almost like when you land at the airport in Lagos, there's like this energy shock you see and you feel. People are hustling. Everyone is trying to sell you something. Sometimes that's irritating, but also it's seeing literally entrepreneurial spirit, right? And, to be honest, because the government has not done a good job of setting up the public education infrastructure, there's so many people who are pushed to do their own self-studying, right? And to be honest, Nigerians are like, look, Web3 is a way for me to change my life, change my economic opportunity. It's a way for me to learn something new. And so people are studying. Even the guy just hired on my team, I mean, he's based in a rural area in Nigeria, or it's considered more rural, I would say. And I mean, he's probably one of the most intelligent people I've met when it comes to Web3. So I think we're just super motivated. I think we have a huge entrepreneurial spirit. And I think it's really changing a lot of people's lives economically. So I feel like that's the reason why there's so many Nigerians who are really educated in Web3.
Well, a lot of people building in the graph ecosystem are in Nigeria. And like I said, a lot of the graph advocates, I recall looking at an early list of where graph advocates were located in the world. And it was United States first and then Nigeria second. So an incredible footprint there. Yeah, a lot of activity there for the graph community. So it's been a lot of fun for me to learn and see that. Going back to your professional career, so you ended up in HR. What drew your interest in studying organizational work and kind of making an early career track into HR?
Yeah. So I kind of had like a weird way of getting there because my first job was actually in international relations. And it actually ties back to why I'm a huge advocate into just building on the continent, doing things there. But I did that. I love the interaction, but I really wanted to get it back into HR. And so for about 10 years, I was doing technical recruiting, right? For me, I feel that number one, I love talking to people. I love connecting with them. It's natural. It's something that even if I'm not paid to do it, I do it. So like, perfect example, I'm out somewhere and someone's like, oh, this is, something I'm looking for, a job or opportunity. I'm like, oh yeah, I know this person. Let me connect you with them. And I've connected so many people just like organically getting a job, or like, I love giving career advice, HR advice, especially as a Black woman. It's really important to help, just help Black women. What's the word I'm looking for? Negotiate for themselves, right? An advocate for themselves. So I'm really just passionate about that. And a lot of the companies I've worked in, not only was I a technical recruiter, but I was thinking about how can we diversify our engineers, right? How can we get more people from different groups that are underrepresented in there as well? So it just ties a lot into who I am personally as a person. But I just love talking to people. So I feel like in HR, you have to be super empathetic and you really have to enjoy connecting with other people.
And you spent a lot of your time in HR in technical industries related to technology and other things. Is that right as well?
Exactly. Except for there was a period I was an entrepreneur before Afropolitan. And funny enough, it was an HR technology company. So it's like I've always been around that intersection, of HR and tech.
I want to ask you questions about what you've learned in that role. And we're going to talk a lot more about what you're currently working on. But looking back in time, in your role as HR and in recruiting, what are some of the lessons that you learned? And I'm asking because I have no doubt some of the listeners of this podcast are probably looking for work and they would really love to know what's the best way to find a job? What are the best resources? And how does somebody successfully find a career path?
So I would love to even speak about this specifically from Web3 because this is super relevant. A lot of people are like, how do I get into the space? How do I break in? And I did it. So I'm always happy to kind of share more about how this could happen. So number one, I feel like how you can break into the space is really start to ask yourself a lot of questions like, okay, I'm in this current job now. Do I want to A, continue on this career path, or B, do I want to switch, right? If you want to continue into this career path, then it's more about asking like, what type of companies do I want to work for and doing a lot of the research, right? A lot of job seekers, I noticed, they just kind of apply. Like as a recruiter, I get a lot of resumes and I can always tell the person who's just randomly applying to companies versus like someone who said, I specifically want to work here and I am tailoring my resume, I'm tailoring my cover letter to join this organization, right? So if you do the research on the front end and you actually tailor your resume, it sounds so simple, but too many people do not do it. They don't tailor the resume. They don't look at, the job description. They don't ask themselves, how does that align with what I've currently done? And even just as simple as changing like your bullets in your resume that align with what the job description is, right? So there's alignment there. So for me, that's kind of like number one. I think number two with Web3, a lot of people feel that, oh, if I'm not an engineer, I can't get a job. But people in Web3, we are looking for community managers. We are looking for writers. We're looking for analysts. We're looking for people in fintech. We're looking for operators. I mean, we're looking for every type of person in Web3, right? So if anything, it's, joining conversations. It could be as simple as joining a DAO and just starting to understand Web3. It could be, I read a lot and I watched a lot of YouTube videos of people in the space, listening to, Naval and Balaji on the Tim Ferriss podcast. That's kind of what opened my eyes up to what Web3 it looks like. So it's really just starting to understand that information and then say, okay, how does that translate into what I'm currently doing as well? So those are kind of, I can go on and on about this, but I would say like number one, tailoring your resume, doing your research, and then also starting to network and then start to just understand, how the space is by like joining a DAO, which I think is like a low lift, just joining because they're looking for people to volunteer and then start to kind of understand the Web3 space from that perspective.
How important is the resume and the cover letter, right? You hear different opinions on this, and sometimes it's like, oh, you got to put more time and effort on the actual verbal approaches to applying for work. Whereas some people say the cover letter is not necessary anymore; it's antiquated. Where do you come in on this?
Yeah, it's it's interesting, that specific question, because I'm gonna be honest, as a former recruiter, I only have 10 seconds. Like 10 to 15 seconds of really looking at the resume and saying yes or no. And sometimes that cover letter, honestly, I've noticed most recruiters are just like, do they actually put the effort to put it in? They may not even really read it. It's more of just saying like, oh, this candidate took that extra step to do it. I feel like the best way to get in front of a company is contacting a recruiter, like using your LinkedIn. Twitter is great now. I mean, some people are still using Facebook, or maybe you physically meet a recruiter in person. I feel that's the best way to kind of get in front of other candidates, because recruiters are actively looking. And if you make their job easier, like, oh, you just landed in my LinkedIn message, I don't have to go through thousands of resumes, to see if you're the right fit, right? But I will say, I do believe if a company's asking for a cover letter, still do it. Not that they may read it or may change the game as far as you getting past the next stage, but even it just qualifies you as, oh, this person took their time to do it.
Well, let's talk about the pivot then that you experienced in your own career. You were working in HR recruiting in traditional technological environments, and then you caught hold of Web3. You had a vision for crypto. When did you first become aware of crypto, and what were your initial impressions?
So, it's interesting. It started way back in 2016. This was when I was CEO of Talent Base. I got into 500 startups. So I left Nigeria and came to California for 6 months to go through the program and to fundraise. And there was a company based out of Korea that was using blockchain technology. Essentially, they were operating like a bank because they realized, oh, if you own a casino or a cannabis business, you can't hold your money in a regular bank. So we will act as that bank to hold your money, right? And I remember being like, I was drawn to that company probably out of all the companies out there, because I was like, oh, this is like emerging markets. I've never heard of this technology. But to be honest, I feel like I dropped the ball, and I was close with them as friends, but I never like went further than that. It was kind of just like, okay, I know what your business is doing. We're connecting, but I don't feel like at the time it was like, oh, it's blockchain. It seemed almost like no different than like IoT, like just that thing over there, like another technology. I didn't know it was going to become this phenomenon, to be honest. Luckily, in 2018, this was when I just left Talent Base. I was kind of like in between exiting from that company and asking myself, what do I want to do next? I joined a company who was doing brand sentiment, right? So they were trying to track brand sentiment using like Twitter, Facebook, other social media, and helping brands just figure out what is the sentiment around their brand. And I don't know if I met a friend and he was in crypto, heavy into the space. And he was like, oh, like, I know in Nigeria it's kind of hard to pay people like through traditional means. Maybe you guys can use crypto. So I went deep into understanding crypto. And then I actually reached out to the Stellar Lumens team, and we were partnering with them to basically, when someone did a survey, which was part of the tools or product suite in this product, that they can get paid in tokens, right? And so that was my first interaction of it. We were on the, verge of doing an ICO, and then the ICO thing popped. and then it's funny because I remember even opening a exchange, and I was going to buy, I think Bitcoin. I was going to buy some Bitcoin. But then I was like, oh, this seems so complicated. And I just kind of forgot about it again. So it's like, I kept getting like near it, but it's like, and I'll kind of go in it and then I'll kind of come out. But I think the final, way is now like I'm fully in was actually in 2019. And I started to buy, some crypto, buy, different tokens just to kind of hold it and save it because I was still in Nigeria and the Naira was going up and down. And then actually it was through my partner. because he actually was really deep in the space as well. That kind of got me really like to focus back on like, this is a huge opportunity. He told me to read Naval's book. He like mentioned like all these different podcasts I need to listen to. And then I'm here now.
Incredible story. So how do you then think about the relationship between crypto and Web3? Because you're recruiting for Web3, you're building in Web3, and then there's this crypto component. How do you make sense of the two?
So if I was to say like how I envision it, I see Web3 like the internet. It's this overall arching thing. And there's so many different, components of it. There's NFTs, there's DeFi, there's DAOs. Now even network state looks like to be an emerging part of this Web3 ecosystem. So I just see it as this huge ecosystem versus crypto, right? I see it more of like the tokens. It's the ability to be part of owning something, the ownership piece of it. So that's kind of how I see kind of the two different categories.
So we're speaking today because we're going to talk a little bit about Afropolitan and some of the work you're doing there. But you're an entrepreneur. Afropolitan's your second entrepreneurial venture. You had one before. That's a theme that emerges on this podcast time and time again. I keep meeting people in Web3, and it turns out that they're aspiring entrepreneurs. So what was that entrepreneurial experience like for you, and what did you learn through it?
If we're talking about my first experience, I would say is night and day from what I experience now. Number one, Africa was not in anyone's radar in 2016. Maybe some companies were raising. So, for example, Flutterwave is a unicorn today. Paystack exited from Stripe. And funny enough, these two companies were actually at YC at the same time I was at 500. So we were actually people who were exchanging introductions. We were connecting, kind of supporting each other as entrepreneurs. And I remember I would go into meetings with VCs and I would pitch them Talent-Base. And mind you, Talent-Base is an HR software company. These other companies I just mentioned are just like payment rails, right? No different than like Stripe, etc. And they'd be like, oh, we already invested in Paystack. We already invested in Flutterwave. And I'm like, we're not the same type of business. We're not the same industry. And at the time, a lot of American VCs could not distinguish the different types of companies. And to be honest, the LPs would say, we're not investing in Africa. Like, that's not in our purview, right? So I had a really difficult time fundraising. I was not successful fundraising in the Valley. I had to go back to Nigeria and actually raise the rest of the capital from Europe and African investors. And so I would say if I was to compare that experience till today, now it was actually quite fluid for me to raise. So once we got the first 1 million from angels who are on the continent, who've been to our events, who are familiar with the Afropolitan brand, then once I started speaking to VCs, they were like, we're in, and if in fact, we actually got oversubscribed. So it's a very different experience. If anything, I just learned a lot about like how to tell a story, how to pitch. I was able to go back to some of my old investors from Talent-Base invested in this round. And so I think just as a seasoned entrepreneur and an entrepreneur that sucked at fundraising the first time around, I learned a lot of key lessons and just how to do it this time around.
So outside of raising money, what's the other skill every entrepreneur should have? What do you need at your core to be able to succeed in being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I would say managing a team and hiring. If you look at any great company, it's because they got that right. And they focus really intensely on like getting those first like 5 to 10 employees that create the base and foundation of the business that they're growing, right? At Talent-Base, I did have a really amazing team working with me, a great set of engineers, and they've gone on to do amazing things. And again, that's kind of the same thing that I'm trying to instill with Afropolitan. And I would say hire slow. Do not hire, quickly, because when you hire the wrong person, it is an expensive mistake versus all the time you spend, the time they spend. Sometimes they create mistakes within the company. It's very expensive, right? And then even just that time of ramping up and trying to find a new person to replace them. So I would definitely say that every entrepreneur should take time to learn how to hire great people and always be, it's funny, someone says always be recruiting as a founder, right? So always be networking, connecting. You never know where your next person can come from in hiring. So for me, that's why whenever I'm at conferences, whenever I'm, Twitter, that's how we found our NFT artist. I was just going on Twitter and I found him, and was able to recruit him and convince him to come on board with what we're doing. So I think it's an understated skill set. I don't think enough people talk about that.
The GRTIQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTIQ. Thank you for listening to this podcast and for supporting this project, especially those of you who have taken the time to leave a review, rate the podcast, or share an episode on social media. The GRTIQ podcast shines a light on the people working to build the Graph, and each week we get to meet a new member of the Graph community, to hear their story, to get a fresh perspective, and hopefully to learn something new. But the truth about the Graph is that it's really about the countless stories happening every single day all across the world, including your story, that will make the difference in the success and evolution of the Graph, and ultimately, Web3. You get to write your own story, so if you have the ambition to help build the Graph, then take initiative and get involved. Join the Graph's Discord, start reading and contributing to posts in the Graph's forum, join the Graph's Telegram and Reddit channels, apply to become a Graph advocate, or join the Subgraph DAO, and look for ways to make a contribution. They're out there. If I can do it, so can you.
Thank you for your support. Roger that.
Well, let's talk then about what you're doing and shift our attention to Afropolitan. And so what's the backstory here and how did it get started?
The backstory. It's a very interesting one. So Afropolitan actually is a brand that's been established since 2018. So it was the premier events and travel company for the African diaspora, starting out in the Bay Area, funny enough. And most of the people that would attend our events were Africans, just like me, African Americans, just all types of people would come to our events. And primarily it was people at like Google, Netflix, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, all the hot tech companies were coming to these events, right? And we also did a major big event. And I think this was kind of like the peak of what Afropolitan was building at the time, was we were able to bring a group of people from the US back to Ghana for the Year of Return. So the Year of Return is an initiative that started by the president of Ghana to basically welcome home the diaspora, right? And it's a series of events and festivals that happen in December. And it actually created $2 billion worth of economic revenue for the country of Ghana. So it was a major event they were able to do. And this happened in 2019. So you can imagine what happened in 2020. No events were happening. All the revenue was gone, wiped out. But there was something magical that came up, and I feel it was a peek into what we're building today. So Clubhouse was on the scene, and me and my partner were early adopters to Clubhouse. And so we built out a huge community. I built the second largest women group on Clubhouse, 170,000 members. And Afropolitan Lounge, that was the name of it at the time, was over 50,000 members. And so we would host amazing rooms. Some of our rooms broke the app. That's how many people were active. And we raised money, I would say, for NSARS, which is a police brutality that was happening in Nigeria. We raised money for conflict that was happening across Ethiopia and East Africa. So a lot of amazing things were happening. And it showed us the power of an online community and what we could really do, with collective action. And so when we fast forward to 2021, we read an article by Balaji called How to Start a Country. And at the time, we were like, oh, this is so cool. But we didn't really know what to do with that information. It was just like a really cool article. It just had us really thinking. And then fast forward to December 2021, my partner wakes me up at 5 a.m. and he's like, Chika, you need to start a new country. And I was like, huh? What? Okay, tell me more. What do you mean? Like, what is this about? And so he just started saying like, Chika, like nation states in Africa are failing. Biology wrote this article. There's DAOs. Like we could actually do this, I think. And I actually found a quote from the Federalist Papers. And essentially, the summary of that quote was saying, are we going to keep making decisions by accident or force, or are we going to make a new decision by reflection and choice? And Africa as a whole has been forced, right? And so we believe that, if we can make this new digital country or network state actually by reflection and choice, and everyone is actually opting in, then this is going to really change the dynamic for the African diaspora. So that's our origin story. And that's kind of how Afropolitan started.
So what do you do at Afropolitan? And tell us a little bit about the team that's working on this.
So I'm one of the co-founders. And honestly, like, it's a small team, 10 people. So like, I'm an octopus. I've got them everywhere. So I'm hiring, I'm putting processes in place, but I'm doing a lot of business development as well. And so when I say business development, partnerships, because in order to build this digital country, you need other communities who are interested and want to understand what's happening on the continent to be, connecting with us. So for example, like the Graph would be a great, community to partner with, right? So also my partner who is the other co-founder, Eche Imole. So he is an amazing at community. That's what he does. Even before founding Afropolitan, he's been building community for over 10 years. And so he's really focused on the day-to-day of, building out the community. So reaching out to community members, we have an application form, we talk to them, we have our own Telegram chat where we're talking to different community members. So he's really focused on that. And then he also was, spearheading our fundraise. And then we have like a bunch of people who are focused on our podcast. We have our newsletter because we feel that there's a lot of data and analysis that is happening in Africa, but it's like not, the information is not in one place. And so that's been a focus for us, is getting that information out to our community members. And then we actually have a special team of people building out our NFTs. And our NFTs are going to be our founding citizen membership NFTs. And so with that, that will launch our DAO. And so we're looking to get that open to the public by mid-September, and then, kind of start that whole process. But Agosa is our artist, and we're collaborating with him. He's an amazing NFT artist. And I'm really excited to, show very soon what that will look like.
It's an incredible story. And there's a lot of concepts to break down here because it seems to be at the foundation of what you're doing. So let's explore this idea of digital nation a little bit here. What exactly does that mean, and why is it necessary?
A digital nation, and I can also speak to the network state as well. It's somewhat aligned, but a lot of people don't realize that a nation is actually a group of people who are all aligned on one mission, right? And so, funny enough, biology talks a lot about how the U.S. may not be seen as a nation because you have different types of groups, different types of people, polarizing ideologies, and we're all connecting and working together. But is that a nation, right? Versus versus Japan, that's a little bit more like a marching band, right? So for us, our main mission is we want to create a nation of abundant Africans, right? And abundant just means you can do what you want, you can dream as big as you want. We are going to create the resources for you to do that. And that is the opposite of what's happening today in a lot of countries like Nigeria, where the government, I feel, has been going in loops. And it's been very, I think complicated for a lot of people to achieve their highest human potential, right? And so that's what we're looking to do, here at Afropolitan. But there is a dashboard that's about 23 digital nation startup societies who are building out, and they all have different missions, right? And essentially that one commandment mission is kind of what I would say signify what a digital nation is.
In the manifesto of Afropolitan, when you launched and you made your announcement to the world, you said that the nation state experiment has failed Black people worldwide. Can you talk more about that and why that's the case?
The easy one or obvious one is obviously I keep going back to Africa, right? So a perfect example is when I moved back to Nigeria back in 2015, Naira was 160. Today is 660. So you can imagine that even if I was being a good steward of my money, and saving it diligently, I still was losing value, right? Another perfect example is that the airlines have been threatening the government to pull their airlines from Nigeria because Nigeria has not remitted back their money they've made. And so now that's a huge threat because basically you're saying that we may not have airlines to come in and out of the country. And this is all because of poor economic planning, right? And a government that hasn't really thought through how can we make sure our people are safe and thriving and they're in have the ability to be their best selves. But another example of this is across the pond in the US. And so obviously there's movements such as Black Lives Matter, but I would even give a very practical example. So Ryan Coogler, who is the director of Black Panther, was actually in a very serious situation where he went to the bank just to withdraw his money, his own money, right? Essentially, the teller called the police on him and said that he was robbing the bank. And the video shows he's literally not robbing the bank. He's slipping a piece of paper to, it's because obviously at a high net worth individual, you don't want to make too much noise of how much you want to withdraw and you're trying to be safe and private. But even a man who has, created probably one of the best Marvel movies to date and, has, in our own eyes, right, achieved high, human potential is still seen as a threat within the US. And so that's kind of, our thoughts around how we feel like it's failed. And we want to create a new economy in a new way where people can actually be thriving.
Yeah, I remember that incident. It seemed totally normal to me for an individual who didn't want to verbally say out loud, I'd like to withdraw, I think it was like $10,000, that they would want to be discreet and use a note. And in this particular instance, as you described, the outcome was horrific. Got a lot of attention here in the US. Another word that's used a lot in the manifesto is this term abundance, and you've even referenced here a couple times yourself. What does this mean? What is the concept of abundance, and why is that important?
I will say it's not as literal as people think, because sometimes people say, oh, abundance means wealth, but we're talking about the abundance of the mind, right? So again, because so many things have happened to Black people, and I will say African as well. I think it's important to understand that there's other groups and ethnicities that are African. So I want to make sure to acknowledge that. But I would say the African diaspora, right? Because of all the different challenges we have gone through, sometimes we have a challenge of scarcity in the mindset, right? So a challenge of thinking big, a challenge of asking for what we deserve, a challenge of asking for what we want. And a lot of times because of just what has happened over hundreds and hundreds of years, we have a scarcity mindset. And so what we're challenging our community members is, let's shift that scarcity mindset to a more abundant mindset. And that means I can dream big. I can be audacious. I can be like Adam Newman and raise $350 million after a failed, startup, at least in his eyes, right? And people are like, how did he raise so much money? But he was audacious and he asked, right? So that's kind of how we want people to think about in their day-to-day lives, is how to be more audacious and how to ask for those things. And it actually requires a mindset shift, right? And so that's what we mean when we say abundant.
So Afropolitan, it's a digital nation. You have to apply. For people that apply and are able to join this nation, what are some of the benefits? What are some of the first things they'll notice about being part of this digital nation?
I would say number one is the network. When I look at the type of conversations that are happening in our chats, I'm amazed. It's people from all walks of life doing incredible things, and just like how they think about things and like just what they're thinking of what they want to do in the Web3 space, what they're building, what they're part of. And so I would say number one is the network. Right now, the African diaspora is very siloed and we're kind of all over the place. And there's a lot of amazing people doing amazing things, but we don't know each other. That's a real big issue. So for example, I was speaking to one of my angels today, and he was saying, oh yeah, there's this team in Kenya building out, I think they call it Crypto Savannah. I had no idea. Right. And wouldn't it be cool to have everybody in one chat? You can't imagine what things people would be building. It goes back to, again, having the right team. And it's about finding these people. So I would definitely say, the access to network is number one. And number two, something else, or two things we're trying to, build out very early on is number one, access to that network turning into access to funding. So there's a lot of people who are in the Web3 space. They want access to funding. As you know, the data actually shows that specifically for Black founders, actually the number has reduced as the amount of funding that's going into these companies, right? And so for us, we have been privileged to be networked with people who are investing, looking for great opportunities. And so we also want to bring that to our network. And I would finally say talent, right? So again, and this could just because I have a recruitment hat, I'm connected to a lot of companies, and I'm aware that there's a lot of Web3 companies that want to hire on the continent, but maybe don't know where to begin, but also being able to be that pathway for people in the network to get, access to jobs as well. So those are kind of the three initial things that we're looking to, build out and give access to our members early on.
In the manifesto, you also talk a lot about the plan, and it's a very detailed description of different phases or steps along this journey as Afropolitan reaches more and more people. Can you provide a high-level overview of what the plan is here and kind of where you're at in those stages?
So phase one is the NFTs, and that's what we're currently working on. We're making sure that not only are the NFTs practical, but also, we have an amazing artist. We have created a lore that's going to be the mythology of Afropolitan as well. And so we're taking time to build that out as well. And I think that's going to be important to seed in the community. And for us, that we feel is the best path to onboard people, especially people who may not be Web3 native, right? You can even today use your credit card and buy an NFT. Phase two is then the super app. And so what we're looking to do with that is, again, once you have a network of people all kind of coming together, they're going to want access to services, right? And they're going to want to see Afropolitan as that one-stop shop where I get access to different dApps, right? And so we are looking to, build out this super app that plugs into different third-party dApps within the Web3 ecosystem. A quick example could be remittance, right? And so we send about 70 billion USD dollars from the US, UK back to Africa every year, right? And right now, it's still quite frustrating how to do it. I have to pay high fees. It's not really a straightforward process at times. And so we feel that crypto is kind of that on-ramp way to do that, right? And so that's something we're looking to build within the app. Then the third phase is what we call our MVP, right? And this is kind of the minimal viable state. And what that looks like, for example, is, and this is still happening today, is obviously Ukraine is still in war. And we had a lot of African students who were in Ukraine studying, and they kind of got stuck. And so right now, a lot of them are displaced, and they don't have the help of African governments to either get them out the system or make sure they are keeping on track. We actually have a few people who have said that, basically now I can't go to school. Other countries are not allowing me in. I'm kind of just in this limbo. And so what would that look like if Afropolitan was able to step in and help, with that, whether it's through funding, whether it's through physical buses to have them or take them to a safe space, whether it's through, actually making sure that we're stepping in to get the UN or someone involved, right? There has to be a collective voice that gets the attention of this. Right now, it's just conversations happening in Twitter and silo. It's not really, no one's really paying attention to this, but it's happening, right? And so that's kind of, some of the activities that we're looking to do. And then finally, we want to have a physical location. And so what we have envisioned is we don't see it being like this one place where countries are. We think that network states are going to be borderless. And so similar to Chinatown, where in every major city in the world, there's a Chinatown. Even in Lagos, Nigeria, there's a Chinatown, right? And so what we want to do is have these Afropolitan towns all over the place where people are convening, connecting, there's commerce, and kind of a safe space for that to be in. But this is a 10-year, 15-year vision plan. Right now, we're just in phase one, and we're looking to go into phase two from next year. Hi, this is Chika Uwazie with Afropolitan. If my conversation with GRTIQ podcast has been helpful to you, then please consider supporting future episodes by becoming a subscriber. Visit grtiq.com/podcast for more information. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
GRTIQ
Podcast.
Thanks for listening.
How do you think about this relationship between where people are living, so in the case of an individual example here. Someone might be living in the United States or they might be living in Europe, and they don't necessarily associate with that nation in which they're living, but they associate with Afropolitan, for example. How does that dichotomy work? Have you thought through that?
Yeah, we have, because I feel there's a number of different reasons why we are reflecting on this. So number one, Afropolitan is being built out in stages, and our dream is, the ability for people to get passports they can actually use and travel to different parts of the world and leave, the country if they so choose. But it may not happen, right? Like that is a very real possibility. And, there's this word, it's a pidgin language we use in Nigeria called Japa. Japa means like being able to go, like leave, right? Or people, we always say like you're Japa to the US, like people are leaving to the US because of what's happening in Nigeria. And not everyone may not be able to, right? So for us, I feel like where we can focus on, and it might not be the best answer, but like actually change someone's economic, opportunity. So perfect example is right now, like if I'm earning Naira, it's not that great. 660. It's making it harder to live a more comfortable life. Could there be a way that Afropolitan gives whether it's because you own our token NFT or you actually got a job or funding through us in a different currency that changes your economic environment to at least, if you have to still be in Nigeria, you're in a more comfortable position, right? So that's kind of like some of the thoughts that we're thinking about. I do hope with time, even if we can achieve this, all over the world, I can travel. We can, for example, achieve a situation where we have one space, and maybe it's probably on the continent where you can at least travel to there, right? And you can live there and work there. Perfect example is we are working with someone from Zambia who has offered many acres of land for us to potentially build something on. And Zambia has already said, we are open to Web3. We're building, policy around it. Could that be maybe the place where people can, as we say, Japa too, right? Where they're going to Zambia and they're living and they're working there and they're not in the current situation they're in. They're in a new situation. So I think we're reflecting on it on baby steps. But number one is making sure economically their lives have changed, and we can do that through Web3 jobs and opportunities, but also maybe it's just another place on the continent where they can actually eventually live.
How can listeners get involved with this initiative?
Yeah. So if you go to afropolitan.io, we have a link where you can literally apply. It takes 5 minutes. And I or my other co-founder, we actively look. So there's real people looking, and we actually reach out. So every single person that fills that out, we reach out to them because we do feel that this is a one-by-one. Also, we have a lot of people who tweet at us. So if you follow us at Afropolitan, we're constantly looking at our Twitter, because there's people that say, oh, I'm interested. I want to be involved. They send us DMs, and we also connect with people from that as well.
Chika, based on what you're seeing, is the next generation talent flowing into Web3?
100% yes. So interesting you asked me this question because my thesis paper at Georgetown was studying the different generations and how they approach work, how they look at work. So baby boomers, it was more of like, I stay at a company for 20 years. I'm loyal. I get my pension. I keep it pushing, right? Gen X is kind of like this in-between limbo. Some of them were like that. Some of them were more like millennials. Millennials was looking for an ethos, right? So they were saying, I'm looking for a company that not only pays me well and I like the company, but actually I align with their ethos. Now you have these new generation where they're like, I'm bold. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to do what's best for me, right? And that could be freelancing. That could be remote work, right? And that's where I'm seeing a lot of next gen excited about Web3 because number one, they could either join a DAO and be part-time there and being, join 10 DAOs before you know it, they're making their rent. They are starting their own businesses. They are able to launch NFT projects. Look at Nyla, who's only age 11, who launched a very successful NFT project, right? Even some of the next gen, community has reached out to us. And, sometimes I ask them, how old are they? They're like, oh, I'm 16, I'm 18. Like they're quite young, right? Even I remember one guy, I think he was only like 13 and he reached out to me because he was going to Crypto Bahamas and he was like, oh, I want to join this Telegram group that Afropolitan started, right? So there's very young people who are already in this ecosystem. I think it's amazing for them. And I think because Web3 is saying you can be a freelancer, you can be a nomad, you can be remote, I actually feel like it actually aligns quite well with the personality of this next gen that's growing.
If Afropolitan is successful and it realizes its full potential in the world, how are things different?
Well, number one, very practical example, you would see Afropolitan as a country just like everyone else, right? As an option. And, for the millions of Africans who are limited to where they can travel freely all over the world. And so, for example, today, I think Nigeria maybe has access to 30, 40 countries without a visa. So you can imagine if more Africans were able to not only just stay within Africa, but being able to travel. I think it sounds very simple, but it's limiting a lot of people from being able to, again, realize their full potential. So that's what success looks like to us. It also looks like a real economic power, that contends with a lot of the other countries around the world. And I would love for, and this is kind of just my overall vision on Afropolitan, is that Afropolitan is what makes Africa relevant in the tech ecosystem. I think a lot of people see what's happening on Africa. They see kind of the numbers and data very vaguely. And we want to bring real visibility and light that there's a lot going on and there's a lot to consider and there's a lot of opportunities, right? And so that's kind of what I want, Afropolitan to do, is put Africa on the map when it comes to this Web3 ecosystem that we're building.
A lot of the themes that underpin the creation and the mission of Afropolitan are top of headlines. There's a lot of talk on social media about these things, and they're sensitive issues. There are things about race. There are things about equality. I want to ask you a very difficult question, and that is in terms of race and race relations. What's your perspective of how we're doing on this in the world as a community, as a human community? Are we making progress? Are we going backwards? Are things stale? How do you make sense of these things?
I think we have some ways to go. I'm going to be honest, but I think it depends on from what vantage point you're looking at, right? So for example, in the US, I see it as it's more subtle now, which is actually scarier, because before it was in the forefront, you knew what it was. Now it's kind of like this underpinning, like where it's like you don't really know until it kind of flares up. And then, for example, that's how the whole George Floyd and the protests happening, right? Where it was kind of quiet for a bit and then it kind of flared up. So that's what's happening now. I'm going to be very honest. I feel like there has to be hand reaching on both sides. And so I think other races, there's a lot of misunderstanding, misinterpreting, and that could be our fault as well as other races. Like, I think it's almost like we're like, I don't know if you know that meme with the Spider-Man, we're both pointing at each other. So nothing's happening. We're just both pointing at each other. And I think there needs to be like okay, let's have an honest conversation and let's talk about it and let's figure out ways we can really help each other. So for me, I what I'm trying to do, my part is just to help educate and share as much knowledge as I can. I feel like the more you understand, the more you can share, the more you empathize people and you empathize on what's going on with them as well. I also feel like even within, for example, the Black community specifically, there's a lot of communication that needs to happen. There's a lot of differences and similarities between African Americans and Africans, right? And so there's a lot of more conversations that we need to do to bridge the gap. That's why I organize these trips to Ghana, to Nigeria. Like, see who we are, see that this is home for you as well. And I think a lot more of that needs to happen. And I'll finally say it's also having other races come to Africa as well. So I'm excited for Eid Safari because I do think all types of people will be coming to Kenya, and some of them it'll be for their first time. And again, once you get on the continent and you see things, it changes your perspective, I feel like, on race.
Something you also mentioned earlier is this idea of gender equality, and another very hot topic, a sensitive issue. How do you feel about, in the context of Web3, how this particular issue is being addressed? And I might even bring up the prior one in terms of equality when it comes to race. Is Web3 the right context or tooled in the right way to address these things?
So I'll be very blunt. I think there's a lot of talking and there's not enough action. So there's a lot of people saying, oh, Web3 is going to change things. Web3 is going to diversify the ecosystem. But a very simple example is when I look at speaker lists, I always do that. So like I go to different conferences and I go to speaker lists and I look for how many women do I see? How many other groups of people do I see? And if it's not diverse, I try to, reach out to them and have a conversation. Right. And so for us, I feel that I'm a little worried that we're going to make the same mistakes we made in Web 2, which is like, all the people we're building are in the space and they're moving forward. And then like 10 years later, we look back and we're like, oh, wait, there's no women here. There's no unrepresented groups here. And then we're trying to get everyone in and it's too late. So I feel that a lot of groups need to be a lot more serious about changing, the representation from the ground floor. It starts as simple as you have a DAO, look around the DAO and ask yourself, where are other groups of people and find a way to do it. I have to commend the Proof Collective. They are probably one of the few groups that they had an event in NFT New York. They looked around. They were like, there's no women here, really. There's no unrepresented groups here. How do we change that? And then they, use their oddity collection to reach out to diverse groups to get them in. And they gifted it to them, right? And that's kind of a great example of like quickly addressing, oh, there's an issue here and making a fix versus like waiting like a year. Well, I mean, most NFT projects are not even up to a year old, but waiting like 6 months down the road or a year down the road and be like, oh, look, shoot, So I think it's that type of action that needs to happen to kind of change, way things are going. If we don't do that, I feel like we're going to repeat the same mistakes as we did in Web 2.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you frame that. I mean, in essence, what you're saying is talk is cheap. And not only that, but you have to proactively address these things. These things don't just happen organically as you say things out in public. You actually have to proactively do something.
Yeah, I agree. It's not about talking. It's not, because the truth is you have to look at your, if you just look at your 10, 15 friends, and if they're not diverse, that's not a problem. Like I can't probe you about your personal life. But what you can say is, okay, my inner circle is not diverse enough. How do I extend my hand to other groups and make sure they're part of the conversation? That's honestly how things are going to have to change. It's not, I know like as a recruiter, I know that the reason why the issues happen with Web 2 is because the people who are coming into the company were not diverse. And if they are referring new people to join, they're just going to refer their friends, and that's okay. And that actually is the right way to do things. But if your friendship group is not diverse, then it's like a snowball effect, right? So it's almost like you have to take a very active approach to change the dynamics.
Could Afropolitan come to being in a world where crypto and Web3 didn't exist?
I believe so. I do. I feel like it'd be, so I think the part where we're coming together as a community and we're kind of on this trajectory to become a nation state, it could happen without Web3. I feel like there would be some key things that would be kind of difficult to do. So like, how do you create a real economy? And crypto is allowing that to happen. Look at Ethereum, look at Bitcoin, look at any, token or graph, right? It's a token. There's an economy. There's people building, there's something happening. Right. And so I feel like it'd be hard to do it without that. And I also think as far as ownership, right? So people are like, oh, I own a piece of this nation state. I'm not just this citizen sitting around waiting for you to give me something, right? I actually own it. And it's through the NFTs, it's through the tokens. I'm part of this community, right? So yes, there is a world that could have been built without it. But I think that ownership piece and economy piece, it would be kind of difficult to figure out how to do it without it.
I feel like Web3 activated Africa. I think the talent and the intellect and the desire for growth and development has always been there. But for some reason, it seems to me that Web3 activated the continent and has opened a doorway. And it makes me super optimistic about the future of the people of Africa. How do you feel about that?
I agree. That's why I'm so excited. I probably tweet it like every other week, like Web3 is for Africa. And again, I feel like if I was to reflect on even just when I was fundraising and we did the conference circuit, so we went to ETH Denver, we went to Consensus, we went to NFT New York, we're going to SALT. And it was like people were drawn to us because like, oh, these are, these are Africans. I want to know what's going on there. I genuinely am interested and I want to speak to people who understand what's going on. It's quite different than what I experienced in Web 2, where people are like, whatever, like I'm building my business and, I have no interest in expanding to Africa. I actually think now it's the opposite, where people are genuinely interested. When you talk to NFT projects or DeFi projects, a lot of them will even say most of our builders are coming from Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, right? And I'm hearing Africa being mentioned on global stages without us even sometimes being there, right? So I am very optimistic. I feel like there's a lot of things we can do. And I feel like, the future is bright for Africa when it comes to Web3, for sure.
Chika, as I've said, a lot of members in the Graph ecosystem who are building and busy at work are also located in Africa. And I've had some of them on the podcast. I've had the Graphica community on here and a couple other people building over in that area of the world. What do you make of some of those type of innovations happening in the Graph ecosystem, and particularly what Index Africa is doing with this new approach to philanthropy?
Yeah. So again, I think we talked about this where we're saying, okay, what is Web3 bringing to the space? What are the new models and the new business opportunities that is happening? So I love what Index Africa is doing, because a lot of people are saying, well, how do we fund philanthropy? How do we make it sustainable? How do we make it ongoing? And how do we get people to be buying in, to this, especially because it can be a thankless model sometimes, right? And so I love what Index Africa is doing, where they basically have a node and everything that is coming to that node is actually being funded back into the education of the students, right? And so again, I see it like as this circle or this community building. And if anything, the more people are building on the graph, and, again, like you said, there's a lot of people in Nigeria and other parts of Africa are doing it, the more they can fund it versus us having to rely on, aid. That's all Africa has been relying on. But how can we make it self-sustaining? So I really love, that model. I'm even asking myself, how can Afropolitan tap into something like that as well? And I actually think it's something that I personally didn't even know this was happening. And so I would love more people to understand like how people can use the graph to do these type of things, right? Public goods, right? A lot of people have been talking about it. When I was a technical recruiter at Protocol Labs, I actually was part of network goods, right? And so this is probably something that they even would want to know about, how they can use graphic for, public goods.
So what motivates you? What's driving this passion and everything and all the energy you're putting into this?
That's a tough question. I would say I love seeing people win. It brings me joy. It gets me excited every day. I love just watching all the creatives in the space. I love watching how many people are able to build these new businesses that they probably were not able to do so before. I would even go back to a story I even forgot about, when in 2017 during the ICO phase, I had another colleague that was also part of 500 startups. A different company was unable to raise. What's interesting is he quickly learned about Web3, or at the time it was just crypto or blockchain, and he was able to raise $10 million through an ICO. And this is a guy who couldn't raise $1 at the regular thing. And he's built on the successful business. He has a fund now, and he's gone on and done amazing. And his life literally changed, right? And so that's what's exciting to me, is that like that type of change is happening to people every day, especially on the continent.
All right, Chika, well, now we've reached the point in the podcast where I'm going to ask you the GRTIQ 10. These are 10 questions I ask each guest of the podcast every week to help listeners learn something new, try something different, or achieve more. So, Chika, are you ready for the GRTIQ 10?
Yes, I am.
The GRT IQ 10.
This is the way.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
Roger that. This is the way.
What book or articles had the most impact on your life?
Wow. I'm a reader. So interestingly, I would have to say The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene. I love that book. I probably read it every year. And again, this probably has to do with the fact that I studied psychology. So anything with like the mind and how the mind works. And it really teaches you about what people want, what are people's desires, how to connect with people. Like, for example, I love the part where he talks about Bill Clinton and how he connects with people naturally, and he talks about those nuances that people may not understand. And so I just love that book. It's one of my favorite books.
Is there a movie or a TV show that you would recommend everybody should watch?
Yes, Black Panther. Black Panther, just because I feel like it's the first time you see Africa or this world in a positive light. I feel like the actors did an amazing job of capturing the African spirit, and I'm excited for Black Panther 2. But it's like almost like a point of pride for me, to see that in reality. So yeah, I would say that.
If you could only listen to one music album for the rest of your life, which one would you choose?
Oh man, what? Ooh, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to decide between Afrobeats music and my love for R&B. I would actually probably say Lauryn Hill's Only album, just because it's a classic. It's just all the songs were just made with love. I could sing them, and it's timeless. It doesn't, like, even 20 years, 30 years from now, people will still be singing all the songs from that album. So I would say that.
What's the best advice someone's ever given to you?
As simple as this is, when you're given lemons, make lemonade. It's very simple, but it has guided my life. Life's not easy. Life is challenging. Curveballs will be thrown at you. But if you take it and make something out of it, you'll be okay in life.
How about this? What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think other people have learned yet?
The power of therapy. And I would say specifically for the Black community, I think it's still a stigma, even deeper the Nigerian community. I think the whole of Nigeria needs therapy. I think we've gone through a lot of things, and I could say my life has changed because of therapy. I personally dealt with the loss of my sister, and it was probably the most traumatic thing I've been through, and I never thought it would happen, and so going through that, I needed therapy to get back in, to kind of give me light again. And I feel like it helps you be self-aware of people. It helps you navigate the world. It helps you connect with people and disconnect with people that you don't need to be connected to. So I would definitely say therapy is number one. Me and my co-founder have both done therapy, and I even think that's the reason why we work so well together, because we both done it.
I have siblings I'm close to, and I express sympathy, and I'm sorry for your loss of your sister.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
Life hack. I would say exercise. Exercise, I feel like it's key. It's mental, it's physical. And honestly, I'll be very honest. I feel like the past 6 months, as I was fundraising, I really got off with my my gym and just like sport activity. And I'm a gym rat. Like, I'll spend like 2 hours at the gym, and I noticed how off I felt. So I'm now revving back up to it. But I do feel like there's a reason why the top entrepreneurs talk about going to the gym or working out, or just having some physical activity. I think it's really key, especially when you're running a business, and especially when you're Web3. It's very easy to burn out. So I think it helps you kind of keep on track.
Based on your own life experiences and observations, what's the one habit or characteristic that you think best explains why or how people find success in life?
I feel it's the people who... I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this. I want to use the word is audacious, but it's a bit different. I think it's a little deeper than that. It's the people who ask. It's the people who, you know how, that saying like closed mouths don't get fed. And I feel like a lot of entrepreneurship is about asking the right questions, asking the right people, asking to be connected in the right places. And I feel like there's an element of audacious, like just putting yourself in uncomfortable, weird situations. It's about dreaming. I feel like it's about like being audacious enough to like dream of things that like don't make sense, like building a network state and just doing it and figuring it out. So I would definitely say it's like just being audacious, that spirit.
And then the final 3 questions are complete the sentence type questions. So the first one is, the thing that most excites me about Web3 is?
Community.
And the second, if you're on Twitter, then you should be following?
Naval.
And the last one, I'm happiest when
I'm traveling.
The GRT IQ 10.
After this, I show you how deep the rabbit
Chika, you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate you explaining all the things that you're working on. And I'm a huge fan of what you're building because I truly believe that there's a lot of potential in this world that goes untapped because of unnecessary barriers and constraints. And I think what you're working on and the success of Afropolitan will unlock a lot of potential in the world to make this place better. If people want to follow you and learn more about your work, what's the best way to stay in touch?
Yeah, so I'm a Twitter person. So just follow me at Chika Uwazie. Also follow Afropolitan as well. I feel like those are the 2 best places to connect and reach with me.
This has been a production of the GRT IQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review. GRT IQ Podcast.